Good morning, everybody. Glad to be back in the studio this early Saturday morning. My name is Ed Samuel. I'm a career coach with a firm called Sam Nova. We're based in Kennett Square, PA, and serve clients in the greater Philadelphia area and across the U.S. So this morning, we're going to talk about the importance of volunteering and why it's so important to include on your resume. You know, I've seen thousands of resumes, but I could tell you way more than half have no mention of any volunteer work at all. And, you know, and I talk to a lot of people about it because we do resumes a lot. And I'll say, well, do you do any volunteer work? And, you know, and I hear all kinds of reasons, but let me give you kind of a summary of three reasons I hear all the time. So the first reason, Ed, you know, I've never done any volunteer work. I said, you know, really? I said, the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years. And some people look at me and say, all I've done is work. That's all I've done. And that surprises me a bit. But some people just consume their lives in work, and there is nothing there. Many, many times when I dig deep into it, people really do volunteer and have volunteered, and they just don't want to put it on their resume for some reason because they believe it doesn't matter. But we're going to get into it in a few minutes in terms of why it really does matter. So that's one reason. You know, perhaps you've never done any volunteer work. That's why it's not on the resume. But another reason, you know, and I kind of alluded to it, that I'm given, hey, Ed, you know, it doesn't matter. Nobody's going to care what work I've done on a volunteer basis. Therefore, you know, let me just exclude it. It's really not related to the jobs I'm applying for, what I'm trying to do in my career. I hear that a lot. And then I explain there's an opposite point of view 100% of the time. And the third reason, and this happens a lot, Ed, I do a lot of volunteer work, but I had a resume writer or a career coach tell me, or even a friend, nah, don't put on that resume because you got to keep your resume to 2 pages. And I've seen that happen time and time again. We're so concerned about getting a resume to 2 pages. Some amazing work that people are doing outside of work is excluded simply because of this whole notion that a resume has to be 2 pages at all costs. And that's a different topic for a different program. And I actually alluded to it in one of my earlier programs and talked about it a little bit. But that's the third reason. So there's really 3 reasons. You haven't done any volunteer work at all. You believe it doesn't really matter to be on your resume because nobody's really going to care about it, and it doesn't relate to your job. And the third thing, I just didn't have enough room. And now, when we talk about volunteering, this is work that you're doing where you're not being paid. And you could be doing volunteer work, because of your faith. You could be doing volunteer work for the community, to a charity. But most of the people that I know that do volunteer work, it's their way of wanting to give back, somehow, give something back somehow. We're in a society today where, lots of times we can get caught up in me, and me, and we focus on work and then we focus on me. Perhaps there's a larger reason, we need to start circling back to, and that's giving back for a much more intrinsic reason. Now, when you think about volunteering, I want to walk through some examples of where you can volunteer, what you might be able to do, especially if you're not volunteering at all today. Now, people volunteer to help people who are in need. Maybe they're given a bad rap. Maybe it's not their fault. Maybe something happened it's nobody's fault, but they're in a bad place, and you want to help someone in need. Now, you might want to help people coming out of an addiction or prison. Maybe it was their fault, but you give them help on their second chance of life. I have a friend who invited me to an addiction center. In fact, the largest addiction center, recovery center in Chester County. And I spoke there one evening, and what a need to help people And he runs a program to help people who are kind of getting out of that addiction, kind of transitioning back into mainstream society again and working through that. But there's a case where it's a program you can volunteer. There's another person that I know who's helping people transition from prison back into society. And and it's very hard, especially when you have a criminal record, and yet you're very talented and you want to get things right. You can volunteer to help people in that position. You can help people, women that are abused. There's 2 or 3 major organizations that are set aside just to do that. You could help children involved in sex trafficking. That's another place you could help volunteer. But, or you could help towards a cause. Maybe people in your family died of cancer and you want to go beat cancer. You want to go and help raise money for that. Maybe it's Ronald McDonald House. Maybe you want to go in and help those families that are going through some really, really tough times. And then maybe, there are some people that volunteer for things that they're really important to them. And my wife happens to be a big, she has a whole effort to help save puppies from puppy mills that are being abused horribly. That could be a focus of where you want to volunteer your time. My oldest daughter, she is one of the world's leading advocates of saving the wild African elephant from extinction due to poaching. That's her cause. She volunteers a great amount of her time in that area. Now, you might want to just step back. You might be a business leader in your community and you want to volunteer. Well, join the Rotary. The Rotary is an amazing organization of small business leaders and professionals. In fact, in our town, the Rotary is meeting soon to meet with seniors and actually helping them. And they're spending 2 or 3 hours with seniors to give them companionship and a host of activities. Another idea for volunteering would be go to a food bank. I went to Chester County, Pennsylvania Food Bank, and I spent some time with the executive director there and the work that they do. Just in Chester County, and you think Chester County might be a very well-off county in Pennsylvania, but it's just amazing the number of emergency food baskets we had to put together for like 60 school nurses in Chester County, because there are children that go into school every day and they don't have food at home. Therefore, the nurses have to have these emergency food baskets at hand to give to the children so they have something to eat when they leave school, let alone in school. There's also another example would be the Breakfast Mission in Wilmington, Delaware. Just an amazing organization. They help the homeless. They help families in transition. And they are constantly in need of help. Another volunteer work would be, especially if you're handy with tools, home repair, would be there's a group I know, one name was Neighborhood Watch, or Good Neighborhood, I should say. And in this particular volunteer group, they go around and they repair homes for people that basically don't have the capacity or means to get to do the most basic repairs to their home, especially people who are wheelchair bound and they can't really do literally anything. You could volunteer in helping the vets. Many organizations there. You could help clean up the roads and streams. I know the Brandywine River, for example, has a once-a-year program just designed to clean up the streams. Now, if you could be active in a care committee at your church. It could be a synagogue, it could be a temple, it could be a mosque. The point being is that you're doing volunteer work, and even though it's based on your faith, you're playing a role. And you could be playing a leadership role, or you could just simply be a volunteer. I know the church that I attended, one of the responsibilities of the care committee was to deliver furniture to people in need once every 3 or 4 months. That's a piece of volunteer work. Again, some people get concerned about mentioning church or church activities on a resume. I'm just the opposite. If you're providing a leadership role and it's something worthy of your time where you've touched lives, put it down. So, I'll talk to someone and say, well, I didn't put anything down on my resume, but I did do 5 mission trips to Africa for 3 weeks. And because I've been to Africa, I know these aren't, walks in the park. I went to Zimbabwe a few years back. Not entirely safe place to go. And we did a lot of really amazing work. My wife went to Ethiopia, flew into the capital, drove 6 hours plus south to work at an orphanage. That's on her resume, I promise you, because that's a type of volunteering that's just amazing. And another one that's often neglected on a resume, and another area of volunteering is for parents who have kids, and you were the assistant coach, you were the soccer coach, the assistant football coach, the assistant volleyball coach, but you did something with your children, no matter what age, right on through, when they graduate from high school, you played some role on a volunteer basis to help them. Put that all on the resume. So I'm kind of walking through examples of there's places to help as a volunteer everywhere. And you don't have to necessarily go do something that you hate. Go do something that you love. Do something that's going to touch your heart so that you can get something on your resume saying that you've done some volunteer work. And again, I'm making an argument that you're doing it because of the heart, although I'm making an argument saying that that's great. Do this work based on the heart. But now that you've done the work, you want to put it on the resume. Now, and if you don't volunteer ever for anything, you got to just ask yourself why. One argument that I've heard from people is that, well, I can't volunteer because it takes too much time. And I'm here to say this is not an all or nothing proposition that I'm arguing for. It could be 2 hours every 3 months. It could be 4 hours a week, 4 hours a year. But don't make it a zero-sum game because you're so concerned that volunteering is just going to eat into your after-hours time. It doesn't have to be that way. You could go down to the breakfast mission on a Saturday morning and spend a couple of hours just helping them sort out the food there. I've done that, and it's a huge task. But if you do it, you get to put it on your resume. Now, for many people that do volunteer, they're leaving it off the resume, and I talked about that earlier, and it's like, well, it's really not that important. And let me give you some reasons why volunteering is important as it relates to someone who's evaluating you, who's interviewing you, who's potentially thinking of you as a leader or a team player as part of their organization. So a leader is going to look at you and say, part of why I want to hire you is because of your education, how smart you are, what you've accomplished, your value proposition. Those are all great reasons. But really strong leaders who are looking for talent, they're looking for something else. They're saying, who am I really hiring here? And when you're doing volunteer work, there's another dimension of you that gets brought to the table, even if it's never asked during an interview, but it's on the resume, it's being brought to the table. And that has to do with the fact that, hey, this person, it's not all about me, and work. This person really, they might actually care. It might be not just about them all the time. This person engages with other people outside of work and their family in a meaningful way on causes. This person has relationships with other people that they have to work through. There's a possibility, in fact, that because of this effort, they're more rounded as a human being. They're more rounded because they see other dimensions of life, people, personalities, people in need, people in trouble, conflict. So here in my office, here in my team, here in my organization, they might be able to relate better to other people. They might care about how things get done, not just the bottom line. And maybe here in my organization or our organization, they may want to give back. Now, these are some reasons why I'm making an argument it should be on a resume, because people look for these things. And yeah, there are people that are out there that are strong, thoughtful leaders. Now, let me give you a real life example of two candidates who were applying for a job, and it was a mid-level position. They both went through a phone screen. They both had the first round interview. They both had a second round interview. In fact, reference checks were done. 6 people in a room, and they said, well, let's write everything down on a whiteboard. So candidate 1, they're writing everything down. Candidate 2, everything was written down. It was dead even. Even the references came out dead even. And one of the senior leaders there said, well, what volunteer work do they do? First candidate, they went right down. Nothing. There was nothing listed at all. No volunteer work. Next candidate 2 on the whiteboard, they went down and said, what volunteer did this person do? Now, this person only had, they had 3 things listed, but the one thing that they had listed was Habitat for Humanity. They were a volunteer for Habitat for Humanity. So a few minutes went by. They conferred, and the person who was making the hiring decision said, we're going with the person who volunteered, had volunteer on their paper. Dead even between one or the other, and they went with Habitat for Humanity candidate who had it down on his resume. Actually, it was her resume. And that's how the decision was made. Now, you're going to say to me, Ed, that's not legal. Ed, that's not fair. Ed, that's not right. Well, I'm here to tell you, after hiring a lot of people over a long period of time and seeing it done as both a recruiter, as a career coach, being in these rooms, I can tell you that everything I just mentioned in terms of what somebody else brings to the table does become a factor when you start to do volunteer work. Now, the irony of it all is the senior manager who was making the ultimate decision there, we looked up his profile on LinkedIn, and guess what he volunteered at? Habitat for Humanity. Now, was that coincidence? I don't think so. But for the person who didn't get the job, they're like scratching their head saying, what could I have done differently? Well, I would make an argument, start volunteering. And the person who had Habitat for Humanity down just happened to get the job because they were volunteering. Now, you got to get it on your resume. And I don't say this often, but damn the people who tell you your resume has to be 2 pages long, because this is nuts. Because what you're giving up, something that's far more important than keeping a resume to 2 pages for reasons that many times don't make any sense at all. And if that, again, makes your resume 2 pages and a quarter long because you decided to put the volunteer work on, I say do it. Now, when you're putting down a volunteer information on a resume, you want to state the organization, the location, and what your role is. Now, if it's a volunteer, great. If it was a leadership role, put down the leadership role. You don't necessarily have to put the years down. But because one of the issues that I hear all the time is, Ed, I was a soccer coach, but it was 10 years ago. I say put it down because it does mean something that you were a soccer coach 10 years ago. Well, Ed, I worked for a muscular dystrophy volunteer on their annual walk for 3 years. But that was 15 years ago. I say put it down on your resume. It's not about the things that you've done this week, this month, this year. It's about, have you spent time? Even if the mission trips that you went on 15 years ago, put them down. Put the volunteer work down. Now, in all of this, there's a truth test that you had to have done something, right? So, and volunteering is not, hey, Ed, I donated money to this cause. Can I put that down? No, that doesn't count. This is your time, sweat, the relationship side of volunteering. It's not about you donating money. And one last item here is, if you worked for a company, let's say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you had a leadership role that, to an external organization, and you volunteered your time at lunch, after hours, to support that organization. And even if you were paid at one level to support that organization, put it on the resume, because that's, again, exposing you to another part of humanity, another part of who you are. And lots of times when you're working for a company, they ask for volunteers. A lot of people don't raise their hands, and the people that do take credit for that because you put a lot of hard work and sweat. But I beg you to get it on your resume. Now, one caution, and I've only had a few people do this, you never want to make it a list of 15 things that you do volunteer work on, because that will backfire on you on a resume. You do keep it to 2 to 4. And then if there were more than that, just say selected in parentheses on the resume, but keep it tight. So as I do my wrap up here, volunteer, 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 but make sure it's an intrinsic reason. Let that take center stage. You need to volunteer because it will have a positive effect on most employers, most hiring managers at some capacity. And the only ones that won't have a positive effect on, generally speaking, are either weak leaders or people who are actually all work, me, and have never given back. Therefore, they have kind of a warped sense of what we're talking about this morning. They may not take it in stride, but I could tell you 95% of the people that I know that have hired people will view it in a very positive way. And it does become that factor in the back of people's mind. And it's a really important factor. Third point, don't make it all or nothing. If you do 1 hour a month or you do 1 hour every 3 months, fit it in. Don't use it's going to take too much time as an excuse. I've already done too much volunteering myself personally. Okay, it's a couple of hours once every 3 months. But you get to put it on your resume, and it's a statement in terms of who you are. And if you've done something in the past, include it. Whether you're active in it or not, include it, because it's a part of your history. It's a part of the value that you brought to other people. And don't be afraid to put your mission work down, your church work down. And if people are offended, too bad. Most people aren't going to say, well, we're not going to hire you because you did mission work. Well, for people who've never gone on a mission trip, what do they? They're missing a lot. But it's an opportunity to talk about your leadership, the volunteer work that you do for the benefits that we've talked about. So we're just about out of time. Please join us again on our next Optimize Your Career program on Saturday, February 16th. Our topic will be how to prepare for a competency-based interview. Sometimes it's called a behavioral-based interview. This is Ed Samuel, career coach with Sam Nova. Our website is www.samnovainc.com. If you'd like to reach me with a question or comment, email me at esamuel@samnovainc.com or call our main number at 610-274-8214. Make it a great weekend. So long for now, and God bless.